good there. You want to move?
Yeah, we'll move in a little bit.
All right.
I'm not in your way, am I?
No, not at all.
All right, so we finally had a few hours to look at this. Is this the plan that has the 18 votes?
Yes, it is. This is a plan, and it's important to note that it will tax only larger trucks on bridges, and that is a much more limited proposal, in fact, even than the one that the governor ran successfully on in 2018. At that time, his proposal was to toll trucks, but on the major state highways. So that proposal was tested and approved by the voters because they voted to elect him based upon that plan about what his toll plan would be. So this is even a much more limited subset of that plan, in that it is only limited to larger trucks on selected bridges around the state.
The trucking industry said today, they've been saying the last few days, that there are at least 4 or possibly 5 of these locations that are in the bill that can easily be diverted by truckers, and so that would easily throw off all of your numbers.
Well, one of the things is that we are charging in the bill to have DOT to develop a plan if indeed there turns out to be a significant diversion at any of the locations where the tolls are planned.
So what kind of a plan?
That's up to be devised by the DOT to deal with that contingency should it arise.
Yeah.
At this informational hearing, there's implications being made that somehow you guys would go ahead with a tolling plan without giving the public an opportunity to be heard. Can you definitively tell us that, yes, members of the public will get an opportunity to present their views to state lawmakers on this latest tolling plan?
Could you address the cameras when you answer?
Yes, that's the plan for Friday, to have an informational public hearing on this bill conducted by the Transportation Committee. People will have a chance to come up and testify to give their views. That's why we were anxious to get this bill out there so the public would have the specifics to react to. It seems to me that what the Republican strategy is already is to ignore the actual proposal contained in this bill and pretend that the proposal is universal tolling of passenger vehicles. And that's not what this plan is, and it's not what this plan speculates, and we have no intention of going to that point. And in fact, there will be specific provisions in the bill, both in the bond covenants that will be issued in the next couple of years, saying that truck toll revenue will be the only source, and it is not our plan to move beyond this proposal to passenger tolls at all.
But
So you disagree with Senator Fasano's interpretation
page
of
10.
the legislation that says that it would require a vote of a simple majority, not a 3/5 majority, to move it to passenger vehicles?
Well, I think that the passenger vehicles are, again, not at all contemplated in this. Our proposal is just this only. We believe this is something that has broad-based public support based upon the votes for what Governor Lamont had proposed in 2018. We've also seen some polling data that this limited truck tolling proposal does have broad support from the state of Connecticut.
But could those guarantees or those restrictions be circumvented as Senator Fasano laid out?
I don't think they can be, because there's broad-based opposition to passenger tolls. I see that continuing, and we're going to be dealing with this plan only.
But there is a loophole in there that would allow, during a quote-unquote emergency, if the governor declared an emergency, and a 2/3 vote of the assembly, to change the bonding setup and the flow. That's standard procedure in these kinds of legislation, is it not?
Well, those are contingencies that may arise, but it's not something that I foresee happening. And the level of opposition to passenger tolls is so strong that I see that as being a very remote, almost impossible situation to arise, since there's such significant opposition to passenger tolls right now in all 4 caucuses.
And your thoughts also, Senator Fasano also said that there was a sweetener in the bond package, that the bond package had been sweetened to $1.7 billion in order to buy votes. What are your response to that?
The bond package at $1.7 billion, where it stands now, is not anything that we see as making any specific representation. In fact, the bond package has not been agreed to in any final form yet, other than the overall number.
Are you opposed to buying votes?
I'm in favor of working as we can to get a consensus, so that members will be on board and have a strong caucus vote on it.
Tell us more about that. One second.
Can I go back to Christine's question just for a minute before we go too far from it?
I get your point where you're saying there's certainly not the political will for tolls on cars, and that's certainly not the intent. On the other hand, it's members of your caucus who've been insisting there be language that say to people, you don't even have to trust the legislative intent. We're putting in these bond covenants to remove it from legal possibility. It looks like it's not removed from legal possibility. Isn't that fair?
I think we're going as far as we can under the rules under which we operate. But the fact that members want to go even further indicate, again, the virtual impossibility of moving toward passenger car tolls.
So it's safe to assume that any future legislature can vote at 50% plus one to do whatever they want, right? Like this, there's no. It seems like it's sort of an optional. Putting in a 3/5 vote doesn't actually have any legal meaning, does it?
Well, it's always the case that future legislatures can take independent action, but our view is that sentiment on this issue is so strong that anything other than what we're proposing in this bill is highly unlikely.
Why is the bond package then up to 1.7 if you're telling me that there's nothing specific in there to make it to 1.7? What is the magic about 1.7?
The difference is that there had been discussion about a 1.6 bond package, and the governor at one point wanted to add $100 million for transportation, for $100 million to go into the general fund, from the general bonding fund into transportation. His original proposal was to take $100 million out of what had been the legislative bonding proposal passed by the Finance Committee that was on the calendar at the end of the session. But instead, basically to cut $100 million to make room for the $100 million more, that was not acceptable. So he agreed instead to agree to add $100 million on.
So just to be clear, you're saying the extra 300 from the 1.4 to the 1.7 is not in any way a sweetener to buy votes to get people to vote for the tolls. It's got nothing to do with it.
As we know, the size of a bond act is in many cases irrelevant. What is relevant is what goes through the bond commission, and that continues to be something that will be negotiated month by month.
Well, you say there's no appetite for passenger cars, but there are people in both Democratic caucuses who favor tolling all vehicles. Should there be a Democratic sweep this fall and a lot of their progressive friends get elected, it could easily be a change of time.
I don't see easily at all. No, I think that the passenger car tolls were so significantly far from having a majority that would be highly speculative at best.
How about the 12 gantries? Is there language in there that you could go beyond the 12 gantries? The language does not say there shall only be 12 gantries, correct? Do you have any fears that there could be more than 12 gantries based on how it's written?
No, based on my understanding from the administration and DOT that there is no plan to go beyond these 12 identified sites.
Yeah, I'm not sure I saw anything about the bus.
But excuse me, Mark, can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
But the legislation, does that, I tell the truth, I didn't look at reread the bill today, but I'm not clear whether it says just limited to those 12 projects or including but not limited to. I think we're trying to get the question at. Is there room to add additional truck tolls?
The intent at this point is just the 12.
I understand that's the intent, but is the effect of the legislation, would that allow additional tolling locations to be added?
I don't believe so. I think you would have to have entirely new, separate legislation to do anything beyond what we're contemplating here.
Was there language to extend bus service in the cities? Because I couldn't see it.
What is required in the bill that in the new oversight board that'll be overlooking the DOT's operations, there will be required that one bus transit advocate be a member of that board, as there'll also be a requirement for a rail advocate to be a member of that board.
And that's enough to get the votes you need?
To keep pressure on the DOT to not ignore mass transit needs.
And that is enough to satisfy whoever it was in your caucus who said they wanted more bus service?
Well, we believe so, because there are other things happening at the same time outside of this bill that we're going to be advocating for in terms of commitments to improve bus service, to reviewing the bus schedules and the bus routes, to relate to updated and changed commuting patterns that we've seen in the state. So not everything that we intend to do on transportation is included in this bill.
So we're anticipating votes on Tuesday and Monday and Tuesday, is that it?
Monday, I believe.
Monday for
And
the
is
Senate?
there
Yes.
Or Monday for both?
I don't know about the House. We're planning to come in Monday. We've invited or suggested our members that Monday the 3rd is the day.
So the Senate will go first.
We haven't decided that.
Will the
We hope so. We would, since the House originally came up with the compromise language that became the bill, was originally suggested by the Speaker and the House Majority Leader, we would give them pride of authorship and hope that they would choose to go first.
what about what
There's a
about
lot
the
of pride involved here. But go ahead.
what about the fiscal note and the pro forma and like how how much revenue this raises? When are we going to see that information?
That should be probably by Friday at the time of the hearing. I would imagine that would be available, if not before.
Okay.
Yeah, I think our estimates were in the area of 170 or 180 million, but we'll know more when we see a more detailed fiscal note, which we hope will be available by the time of the hearing Friday. Yeah.
Senator, what about the makeup of that transportation board?
Well, as I understand it now, there are 13 members, 6 legislative leaders would each appoint 1, the governor would appoint 6, and the state treasurer would be on it.
So they do have the power to set rates, right?
The DOT will set the
Initial
initial
rates,
rates,
and then they
right.
will have the power
Any
to-
change after that, and again, the change would be limited to an inflation adjustment, not anything beyond that. And that panel would have to approve any rate change proposed by the DOT.
Well, actually, the bill says the greater of the rate of inflation, or it says the construction employment index,
Right,
which,
right.
which I don't know
Which
what
is
that
another-
means,
which
but
is
there is
another,
something that the Federal Highway Administration puts out
It's
called
another
the National
inflation-
Construction.
It's another inflation-related index.
So that's the quarterly measure that the Federal Highway Administration uses.
That's right. So there would be no automatic increase. So should there be an inflation rate that is identified, then if the DOT suggests an increase to match that inflation rate, that would then have to be approved by